Hey guys, so I think it's time to look at some model games, and we're going to start with a game where Komsky was playing against Jacobian, and Komsky lost as white. He was one of the world's leading London specialists, although back then he didn't know that you should play 5 knight bd2, because the queen b6 lines are just so annoying. But to be fair, this was an older game from like 10 years ago or something, so c3, queen b6, black is better, haha. Actually though, free space advantage, queen c2, bishop f5, queen c1. We already talked about all the theory up to this point. The gist of it is, as mentioned already, black gets both sides develop their pieces, and then if there's nothing concrete, then black gets a free roll on the queen side. And Komsky's pretty good, right? About 2,700 FIDE, right? So you'd think that if anyone would find something concrete, he would. But the problem is he didn't, because it wasn't obvious that you'd do anything concrete. And oops. So it's just a free space advantage, and white has to minimize the damage, which is not easy to do. There's different ways black can play, like you can take here and play b4. I mean, I guess I'll look at that. In the game, b4 was played. I don't really want to focus on variations because it's all about the concepts here. But, okay, bishop takes f5, e takes f5, knight e5, bishop d6. In these positions with a static advantage, you can play lots of moves. Black could play a5, black could move the queen to b6, black could play knight to e4, black could have taken on c2 first. It maybe matters, subtly speaking, but basically white's defending and hoping to minimize the damage. And as already mentioned, the long-term plan is, if you can, you swap these pawns off and you have a pretty strong pass c4 pawn. And that matters a lot. Remember a friend and student of mine, Ian Jackson, just followed this plan and got an absolutely crushing position against 1900 in the slow over the board tournament a few years ago, and I've had plenty of games as well. So anyway, if you want to know the concrete details, by all means check the Annotated Games non-video section. I don't know how much that actually matters for this opening. To be honest, though, you're also welcome to ask further questions. Okay, the way I see it, all this happened. Now the rook's under attack, the b2 pawn's under attack. Black didn't have to sack the pawn, but he did. Okay, and, well, you can move the rook here, but at absolute minimum, black can just go for this, then take, play d4. There's still some initiative. I'm sure there's plenty of other options as well. For example, you can attack the queen, you can bring the queen into the attack. The e3 pawn is a weakness. White's rooks are all passive. You're going to win your pawn back. The pawn storm continues, and white's pawns are not very strong. Just to put it simply, and I don't think the tactics were enough. They at least didn't seem to be enough, and white sacrificed. I mean, what can you do? You don't want to just play completely passively here. But I mean, these tactics for me are just not very important. They're not important because they're not thematic in the same sense. What is thematic, in my view, is what happened much earlier. Black just played this pawn storm, and white was defending. Different opponents may try to struggle differently, and, well, you can figure that out over the board. Do your tactics, do some calculation, you'll be fine. Though I will say I have messed these positions up sometimes. I recall sometimes white has played like knight e5, knight takes c6 or something with the bishop on f3, and then I pushed pawn to b4 at the wrong time, and oops, my b pawn was not defending c4, and then he took on c4 or something. Something like that, right? Okay, well, if that's all white has, it doesn't take too much to be careful. Anyways, going back to the game, the rest is a matter of technique, and I'm going through this relatively quickly because I just want to focus on the thematic ideas to make it as simple as possible. If you have questions, you're welcome to ask in the notes. Okay, and this was simple chess. Black has passed pawns, black has an attack, and he had simpler ways to win as well. And, well, just decisive material advantage. Komsky versus Vladimir Jacobian from about 10 years ago. London system down, number 1. On to the next game. Number 2, let's see if I can at least moderately pronounce these names correctly. Bowie Boshima versus Miroslav Woznicka. Okay, hopefully that was at least 50% correct. Alright, I remember Sean was suggesting I give this lesson as if I'm talking to a student, although if I was talking to a student, I probably would have it more like a dialogue, question and answer. Which, again, you're welcome to do if you want. Just ask questions in the notes. Okay. Alright. Bishop f4, c5. As always, we meet bishop f4 with c5, whether it's on move 3 or on move 2. Knight f6. It doesn't really matter which knights you bring out first. Knight d2. We've talked about this. If the queen comes to b6, after queen b3, c4, queen c2, there's no bishop f5 anymore. Okay, bishop f5, e6, queen c8. The point of this game is, unless white gets concrete counterplay, again you get the free pawn storm, free to c4. C4 space advantage. So h6 and lots of ways to play, but well, why can black just always play the same plan? Well, it's very simple. If the position is closed, the opponent doesn't have any threats. You can't do anything concrete, then you play the structure. And the structure says these pawns are weaknesses and we're going to attack the base of the pawn chain, plus attack in the direction of your space advantage. Wait, why this setup specifically? Why h6? Well, because knight h4 is one of the few concrete ideas white has, and you want to preserve the light square bishop if possible because it helps control very, very active long diagonal, a lot of white squares, and also the e4 break. White just sits around, a4. I mean, usually I play b4 instead, but a4 is fine too. You're going to play b4, a3, you're going to castle, simple chess. And by the way, this is a game between two 2300s. But a3, and I mean, this is one of the reasons why I, generally speaking, prefer to play pawn to b4. I generally prefer to play pawn to b4 because then they can't close things up so much. Like, let's imagine that I'd already played b4, and he played a3. Well then, I guess I could take him, or I'll keep the tension, and I would imagine I would get these sorts of positions pretty often in some form or other, where, yeah, I have the b-file, which is going to be more relevant after if I could use that square. I don't know, maybe queen d7, bishop d6, or maybe I'd play a4, bring the knight to b3. Okay, black still has ideas, but I didn't get my past c4 pawn, and that's how I like to win the games. So going with a4 after a3, my intuitive impression is, dang it, they closed the queen side, how am I going to break through? But there are ways to break through. One of them is, you bring the knight outpost to b3, and white kind of has to make some exchange at some point or else it's too cramping, and then you have pressure down the a-file and can sacrifice against white's a3 pawn. Another option is b4 with a sacrifice, and 3, maybe white's pieces are going to be so passive over here and defending against possible sacrifices that you can break through somewhere else. So we're going to see play on the queen side in this game. Alright, now this big space advantage. A space advantage is when your when your pawns are taking away important squares from the opponent's minor pieces. And also here, it's like this pawn on b3 is far advanced relative to pawn b2. And if this sacrifice ever works, then that's going to be a really strong pass pawn. White always has to keep that square defended, but because black has more space, he can just build up. Let's say some sort of castles, rook a5, queen a6, rook a8, and then one day just sack, or b4. So there's definitely ways to break through. Another typical idea is targeting the b2 pawn with this knight maneuver, knight d7, knight b6, knight a4, and then knight takes b2 after preparation, followed by capturing that a3 pawn. With two very strong pawns for the piece, and black always has the b4 break to remove the opponent's defender on c3. Okay, so queen d1, castles. Okay, I'm gonna go... Well, white has to do something, right? And as mentioned already, we could always prepare this sacrifice later. White has no counterplay, the position's closed, which is what white wants in the London. White wants to have the position closed so that he can survive the opening, right? Survive the opening with simple development. The problem is, if this position stays closed and black is the one with a static advantage, which he is when he has the space advantage, and especially when white does not have e4, then in the long run, black is the one who's going to break through. Anyways, bishop takes a3, a very typical breakthrough. Rook a2, and I mean, these pawns are just stronger than the piece. No calculation is needed. There's lots of ways for black to win. The gist of it is, sooner or later you break free with these pawns, and white is totally passive. This b3 pawn is really strong, and 2 pawns in the 6th rank, or as black, 2 pawns in the 3rd rank, are often worth a rook. So that's just enough compensation, at least. And, or really, white can resign. After rook c2, you can always play c3 and just take everything, so white had resigned on move 32. So, in review, black is once again crushing in the long term with these c4 structures. White needs concrete counterplay, and it's not obvious how he'll get it. Plenty of masters failed to find the counterplay in the game, and once the pawn storm breaks through, it's just really hard to play white's position, if not objectively losing. So, a4 is a typical idea other than b4, and that black can press, even with the pawn coming to a3, closing things off because of the b3 outpost and because of possible sacrifices. On to the next game. So with this next game, we have a game between Anthony, am I going to pronounce this right? Anthony Mangelello? Well, hopefully that's not terrible. and Anton Smirnov. Okay. Who are these players? I forget. They're probably like 2,300 or something. And if they see this video, they'll be like, bro, I'm GMs. What are you saying? Anyway, I forget. So, C5. What's the main idea of this game? The main idea of this game is to illustrate how black can play in these typical endgames with the space advantage with a typical example of pawn storms. Okay, so that's exactly what happened. Black is, like, there's lots of ways to play it. Again, in closed positions, you have lots of options. You can play b5, b4. You can play e6 and keep the bishop in the chain. You can play bishop f5 and then e6. Personally, I'm just really emphasizing the structural idea of this pawn storm. I think it was Grandmaster Axel Smith in his excellent book, Pump Up Your Rating, where he would talk about the importance of pawn levers. And he even had the chapter called No Pawn Lever, No Plan, specifically talking about ways to break through or ways to get counterplay in closed positions or positions with the static advantage. So this being a closed position, pawn breaks matter a lot, perhaps even more than development, and very typical stuff. All positional. And the plan that I was mentioning, just pawn storm, swap both pawns off, pass c4 pawn, is exactly what happened. Now, black has the bishop pair, black has a passed pawn, this is an isolated pawn, it shouldn't be that difficult to play the black position. Probably it's objectively losing for white, or very close to it. And so white didn't manage to resist very well, but he also had terrible pieces, so it's hard to imagine playing much better, because the position was probably already lost. So the e3 pawn was weak, breakthrough, improve the king, a2 is kind of weak, pass pawn, take pawns, crushing. Simple chess. And where's the improvement for white? By the way, you could just take twice. Ah, yes, hiccups. Take twice and then promote. Where's the improvement? Well, let's see. Maybe the improvement's e4, except for the Berlin, but okay, that can't be it, can it? Maybe, yeah, I think probably the improvement's c4. Yeah, that's definitely the improvement. But I guess technically another improvement's 92, or some way that white can defend a worse position better. But black's plan is too easy, and white's the one who has to find some way to interfere. Because if black's pawn storm just works, he just wins, right? In the long term, passed pawn, weak pawn, better pieces. This pawn also restricts the opponent. No, without counterplay, you just win this way. And I've won plenty of games that way. I hope you do too. Okay, next game. Kevin McCarthy versus Peter Wells. Was Peter an international master? I think so. It was mentioned in one of Agard's books. I forget. But anyway, this is two masters, and the idea of this game is to illustrate, again, more endgames. But this time the opponent is trying to be annoying by preventing pawn to b5. But we don't care, because we're just developing, and then we're going to attack the knight. So he tries to get in, make threats, hope we don't see it, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We attack it. If he comes in, then he gets all trapped basically after king d7, and then we just take it soon. So I like free pieces. I hope you do too. But I mean, if you go back, then you just lost time, and the knight's gonna get captured. So a4, bishop c2. That's a pretty good pawn. Well, I'm just gonna capture it. And now, wait, was white 2300? I forget. But black has up a free pawn, and it's a pretty important pawn because now black can pawn storm. White's idea to stop b5 doesn't work because black's bishop is here. And, well, the other idea that this game shows is that you can sacrifice for the pawns. And the passed pawns are very, very strong here, by the way. Black didn't need to do that. He still have a pawn, but I would very much want to do that. I want to do that because, in general, these strong passed pawns are worth more than a piece. One passed pawn that is connected and passed, with two pawns for the piece, is worth more than the piece almost always. And it's a very, very, very typical London sacrifice. It's, as Nimzovich would say, about the passed pawns have a lust to expand. Well, I mean, I don't know. Someone warned me, some people may not like that. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The idea is you want to advance the pawns down the board to promote them, and when you advance a passed pawn, it's like you're increasing your material advantage with every move that it advances because, well, from 1 point of material to 9 in one move, promotion is just so much of an increase that the opponent has to watch out. And I think, was it Philidor? Well, pawns go together, right? Pawns going together, supporting each other down the board. This pawn on c4 is, well, it will be passed with the c3 pawn gone. It'll be easily supported by the b pawn. It's an archetype for when the pawns are stronger than the piece. For details, you could also see my chess.com series on piece sacrifices for pawns. Anyways, white didn't even want to take the knight because he realized he'd just get crushed something like this, and it's like, well, I'm gonna push it. I'm gonna push here. I'm gonna play knight e4, and too bad, you're busted. So rook b1, knight c2, and well, I mean, you still push your pawns, and then you win because you're having queenside pass pawns. So another easy victory against the London system. Okay, next game. This next game is between Vladimir Petkov and Momchil Nikolov. Okay, this is a game between an IM and a GM, basically. And this was 4 or 5 years ago. Or was it 6 years ago? Yeah, it was a rapid game in 2016. Okay, so what's the point of this game? The point of this game is to show more endgames where you pawn storm. But the difference is you can't get b4 in right away because they blocked it and because he unpinned. So if his rook was on a1, you push the pawn and you take it because you win the rook. But now you can't really push b4, so how does black use his space advantage if there's no pawn break and no target? Well, there is a target. The target's right here on b2, and the gist of it is your knight comes to a4, you take the pawn, then you take all the other pawns, and white better find a plan to stop you. h6 is good, mostly because the rook can defend the pawn if the bishop's not on f5, so don't let him play knight h4, because then you can go back. That's kind of important, because I think it was Kasparov who said that one of the art of chess is in not letting your opponent show you what he's capable of. I'm showing plenty of games where the London just gets crushed because all of white's counterplay is gone. But part of this is in the mindset of prevent the opponent's counterplay, because he doesn't have very much to begin with in these c4 structures. So, I mean, if you can prevent something simple that allows the opponent to defend the pawn and whatnot, just do it, right? h6, development, same thing. And what happens? Well, okay, well, the concept is if white didn't maneuver the bishop to c4 to d1, then you just take the pawn. So, or maybe he would take with the bishop on a4, right? And then b takes a4, and maybe you'll maneuver your rook and then get that b2 pawn that way. So there's plenty of plans for black to break through, and this knight d7 b6 a4 maneuver is key. The opponent went out of his way to stop it, and it kind of worked, but there's a breakthrough anyway. The gist of it is it took white so long that he's just getting crushed with this skewer. If he takes it, so he doesn't take it. He just castles. But now black's b4 idea just worked. And if white, let's imagine that you didn't have b4. Black can still try to make progress. Moves like knight a4. Remember, there's possible b4 breakthroughs anyway. Maybe you'll sacrifice one day. Maybe you'll get 2 pawns for a piece. But you can also just play patiently. You don't need to be winning. Your c4 pawn restricts the opponent. Just play positional chess, take it easy, and see what happens. Yeah, my coach, Yakov Norowitz, he would teach me, Elijah, you don't need to try to crush your opponent all the time. Sometimes you can just relax, take it easy. You don't need to know what to do. You just need to know that your opponent knows less than you. And it seems to work sometimes. Okay, b4, and, well, you can take a3, but I guess black didn't want to let white get counterplay on the b file, so alright, fair enough, no counterplay, and yeah, you can sacrifice on a3 with a typical excellent compensation at least, but you can also play gradually, and, you know, the whole point of this maneuver was to get to a4 and target b2, and white protects it, but then we have more typical sacrifices, and probably any of them would have worked. Knight b2, knight c3, bishop a3. Because at the end of the day, you get 2 pawns for the piece. These pawns are very strong, they're connected, they're passed, and you don't need calculation to justify this type of sacrifice. Black is just better, or I would say winning. And soon the passed pawns just crush the opponent, just advance them, then they become pretty close to being a queen. As they advance down the board, it's like increasing the material advantage. Nimzovich's lust to expand pays off. Haha. Okay, and okay, well, sacrifice to break through with the pawns, and there's just nothing white can do, essentially. White resigns. And there were other ways black could win. But the key concept behind this game is the power of the passed pawns, as well as typical sacrifices, and in positions where the opponent prevents pawn to b4 with this pawn structure, pawn a3, pawn c3, move the rook to unpin, you can maneuver the knight from f6 to a4 via d7 and b6. That is the key idea. Happens very often in these endgames. And because I don't like this structure quite as much as when I can actually play an early b4, I prefer to play b4 very early before white can get this. But black is still better, and black still has ideas to press for the win. So looks like we got 3 more games left. This game's between Sun Win and Michel have Sheen. I can't even pretend to pronounce his name. White was 2600-ish, and black is also 2600. So what happened in this game is knight bd2. That's the point of the game. The point is we're going to illustrate an example game with knight bd2, bishop f5, and d takes c5, because this is one of the few concrete lines where you can't just like free roll them with queen d6, and it does concretely work more or less for white because you have to gain it, because there's a tempo, and otherwise white takes c6 and protects the pawn. So you're kind of forced to go for this position if you meet 5 knight bd2 with bishop f5, which is the main recommendation of this course. So I already sort of said this is about dynamically balanced. I believe the space advantage compensates for the pawn structure, and black's good light square control compensates for white's bishop pair. Some people may disagree. It's definitely a critical position. But this game just illustrates typical ideas. The gist of it is we have an outpost here, we centralize all of our pieces and figure out what to do next. Which is exactly what happened, except white maybe should play c3 at some point if he doesn't want black to play d4, because d4 undoubles the pawns. Sorry, not undoubles, that's kind of funny, because I'm so used to the double pawns on the queen side with b5, b4, b takes c3, and here it's not doubled, but it's isolated. And the way I see it is black's centralization compensates for white's bishop pair, and plus you want to grab that bishop anyway. So c3 is played, probably white should exchange it, but then black is just really centralized. All the pieces are super active, and that compensates for the bishop pair. And I don't see the bishop pair being that helpful, because we have a dark squared bishop against his dark squared bishop, and white's light squared bishop just isn't better than the knight, and he can't move it anywhere. Like, I mean, you can, but it's just not going to do anything meaningful. So I would say black is equalized. And plus, who knows, maybe there'll be some pawn storm one day. Maybe you'll bring the king in. Maybe you'll do knight d2 and invade with the rook. There's plenty of options. So let's say c3, takes, and now black just has the initiative, right? Because of his centralization. And going back, you may notice that in these positions, black, it's very typical for him to get the initiative. And no wonder, because he has more space, and because he has more piece activity. So let's go back to the game. Alright, well that knight was getting annoying because maybe black would capture pawns, so white took it, but now there's no bishop pair, and all black's pieces are super active, and plus the bishop is attacked, and there's a pin, so bishop g3 doesn't help that much. And white was probably getting annoyed that certain moves like rook e2 would be coming soon, so he tried desperately to block the e-file, but it didn't matter because the e3 pawn became weak, and black just had a free roll positional advantage based on the weakness. The outpost square, rook e8 was coming, and now black's up a pawn. And maybe white can try to defend better, but objectively this should be winning. It's not like white's ever going to make a pass c-pawn. Black is way too active, and the kingside pawns are potentially going to become passed at some point. So black just advances king and pawns, and it was just a matter of technique. I don't want to go through the details. As always, if you're interested in these details, you can ask questions in the notes, but I'm here just to illustrate key ideas mostly, and we're going to go back at the end and review the typical ideas in the games. Okay, so in conclusion, 5 knight bd2, bishop f5, these positions give black a pretty good piece activity, and even grandmasters can easily go wrong as white. It's not so easy to play. Okay, next game. This is a game between Adam Rokos and I.S.T. Van, yeah, I don't know how to pronounce that, and Taskovitz. Yeah, hopefully I got that at least 50% correct. I'm sure plenty of people butcher my name as well, so this is an example game to show what happens if white tries to keep the pawn. We already talked about this. We just attacked the base of the pawn chain. White sometimes tries to keep the pawn, and I was saying, oh yeah, just play knight g4, queen f6, e5, good dark square control, free roll initiative, but, I mean, you're down 2 pawns, right? So I might as well actually show a game where this happens in practice, and in practice, white just got crushed. There's d4, d3, d2, every piece developed, white can't move. Yeah, it's pretty horrible. Not much to say. I mean, for me, these sorts of pawn sacrifices tend to be pretty intuitive because I studied a lot of Morphy when I was younger. I remember originally inspired by Ben Feingold's videos, actually, which is, he's amazing. I hope he publishes on Chessable at some point. So, anyway, black got a pawn back and took all the pawns, and, I mean, when you have all of your pieces active and the opponent doesn't, things tend to be pretty good for you. So, yeah, just a matter of technique. Again, you're welcome to check the notes if you want details and blah, 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 but the gist of it is development, attack the opponent's pieces, centralize everything, make threats. It's pretty simple. And white can't try to keep the pawn without you attacking it, and, I mean, learn a few lines and you'll get it back all the time, or a dominating initiative like this game. Okay, next game, and last game. There's this ridiculous 3e4 move, this sort of crazy gambit, but we go for this dynamic knight c6, and the main point of this game is to illustrate what happens if white grabs the exchange this way. I kind of brushed it aside. I was like, well, you know, we got a pawn for the exchange, and that knight's kind of trapped, and in practice this is pretty easy. But what happens in a real game? Well, in a real game, this is between an international master who I cannot pronounce his name, Alexander... No, or was it a FIDE master? Velikanov, yeah, okay. And Grandmaster Conrad Holt. Yeah, Conrad. Yeah, I have a roommate named Conrad. We call him Comrade. So Comrade Holt, indeed, sort of. And well, hopefully not. And in the game, it was pretty easy. I think an older engine, gave triple zeros at some point, but it was really difficult for white to find the only moves that at all justify this. Oh, I guess technically you had to play it this way. I wonder, yeah, bishop b5 and castles and some only moves, or something like that. I definitely prefer black because this knight's trapped and stuff, and it's easy to develop. But all right, fine, computers can defend with only moves. In the meantime, we're gonna grab that knight. So that's exactly what happened. The knight started getting trapped, and also there was an outpost and great compensation and good development, and the king was kind of exposed, and I mean, black just has a decisive material advantage too, and as usual for the London, white is the one who needs tactical justification to play this way. It doesn't matter so much if the engine finds a bunch of only moves for white to equalize. The point is white is the one equalizing. And white resigned because he's getting checkmated with g5. So let's summarize everything. Well, in the games, we saw a Komsky game where black dominated with this c4 plan, and there's a free pawn storm with b5, b4, and getting the pawn to a3. Maybe white will interfere, but in the meantime, he's still on the defensive. There's also plenty of other games we looked at. One of them is if white blocks the queen side, we can put the outpost in, and sometimes sacrifice our pieces for pawns. The pawns are usually stronger because they're passed and connected, and we have more space. And there's other games that illustrate this too. More free pawn storms. What other is there? More free pawn storms, more piece sacrifices. And then if white tries to be confused, tries to block the position with a3, c3, and bring the rook out, we can maneuver the knight to b6 and then a4, try to take pawns, and then sometimes sacrifice later. Still, the b4 break is a tactical idea, sometimes tactically justified, even if it's protected. If the opponent goes for the 5 knight bd2 line, starting from the beginning, then sometimes he goes for this imbalanced position. It's pretty critical, but black gets a lot of activity, and it's pretty easy to just play with development, principled moves, and initiative. The next game was white can try to protect the pawn, but, you know, we just get it back, or we go for this one line where white sacrifices. But it's a big initiative, and it's pretty simple principled chess where white's just not doing fine, and he needs to prove that he's surviving. As usual, of course. He played the London, after all. And then this last one was a sort of unsoundish sacrifice where we can either accept it or play knight c6, and just an example of the down and exchange position that often can happen if the opponent's prepared, but usually he's not, and often just gets terrible positions. So hopefully you're prepared to crush the London. The London system is a terrible opening, though I admit that if white plays concretely with the London attack style, he can equalize, and I mean, I guess it's sort of playable. I can't be too generous here. After all, it's the London, and I'm not being so critical of the London. I mean, after all, I really wish my opponents would play it more against me. Anyways, I hope that you enjoyed. Feel free to ask questions in the comments, and I'll see you in future courses. Bye!